Welcome back to BLOCKTV. This is Crypto Crunch, where we break down the top industry stories of the week. And what a week it's been. Today, thankfully, we're joined from Helsinki by finance magnates Rachel McIntosh. Hey, Rachel.
I'm doing great, Ron. It's great to see you.
You too. And like we said, a busy week for crypto and blockchain news. We asked you to select some stories from finance magnates from the week. And we're going to start with probably the most recent big story to come out about the SEC rejecting Bitwise. Another one bites the dust for now.
Another one bites the dust. Yeah, that's a
Seems
great
like
way to put it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, go. No, you. Okay. Well, yeah. Basically, I mean, there's not much more to say. I mean, that's the story. The SEC came forward finally. You know, all this anticipation, all this waiting we've been doing for such a long time on these decisions. Of course, we had Van Eck and Solidex backing out last month, sort of maybe anticipating that something like this would happen to them too. But CBOE, Bitwise went forward and was like, we're going to try to do this, but alas, here we are. So either it's not clear whether they're going to refile for an ETF specifically. They did say on their Twitter feed that they're exploring different kinds of exchange traded products with the SEC. So still working on something, not necessarily an ETF.
But when it comes to, I mean, first of all, should this surprise anyone? I mean, you know, we've seen a pattern emerge where companies apply and then reapply and then reapply, and it keeps getting delayed, and then either it gets rejected or they change their mind and pull the proposal just before the deadline's over. But I don't know, it kind of felt like Bitwise, they seemed very confident going into this, saying, all right, you know, everything that needs to have changed since our last proposal went through has changed. You know, we can show these numbers, we can show these statistics. There's been improvements when it comes to custody, when it comes to wash trading, you know, all these things that they've highlighted in the past, but not enough for the SEC.
Not enough for the SEC. And, you know, of course, in early September, we had Jay Clayton coming on CNBC and saying, you know, look, there's still work to be done before this can be approved. And of course, Bitwise did, you know, do a lot of things, make a lot of progress, show a lot of progress in the industry that showed that they, you know, of course, could identify market manipulation. They're building tools to, identify and prevent market manipulation from happening, making good relationships with custodians and setting up good standards for custodianship of assets. But I mean, the SEC hasn't really ever laid out a really clear set of guidelines for exactly what needs to be done. I mean, Jay Clayton has said many times, like I said, more work to be done. We need better custodialship. We need better tools for identifying and preventing market manipulation. But there isn't, you know, you do this and then we'll do this. It's always sort of been like, well,
and then we'll see. You do it, and then we'll see where we stand. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's got to be annoying also for these companies. You know, they're there representing, you know, the entire Bitcoin community, so to speak, and you know, they're being judged according to the assets' flaws or strength. And it seems like there's not much an individual company can do in order to change the situation, except for be patient and try to reapply. Obviously, we didn't really see the price of Bitcoin be influenced by this. You know, if anything, then the price went upwards in recent hours. So it's difficult to tie anything together there. I mean, maybe if this would have happened 6 months or a year ago, we would have seen more dramatic market reaction, but nothing today, right?
Right, exactly. It's at this point that it's like nobody's really surprised that this happened, I think. You know, when we first, we had the decision around Gemini's ETF, was it last August? You know, in the days leading up to that decision, we saw a big upward price movement. Right. And of course, after there was a denial, then boom, it went down. But after that point, every time that there's been these, you know, upcoming decisions or the upcoming possibilities of delays on decisions, the market doesn't really react. I think that, institutional traders in particular are kind of, you know, more savvy now and getting more and more savvy to the fact as time goes on that this isn't something that is likely to happen anytime soon, perhaps.
Right.
And even if it does, is it something that they're really interested in, in the short or long term? There hasn't been a ton of institutional interest in other products that have been released, or platforms released. Backed, for example, didn't really move the markets in the way that people thought that it would. So yeah, I think
This isn't a silver bullet situation. Yeah. All right, let's move on to your next one, because it's super fascinating. Looking at Hong Kong and this correlation or possible correlation that we're seeing between a run on the banks and then increase in demand for Bitcoin. You guys did some research on that. What would you find?
Right. So there's been this sort of story that's been reported across a lot of different crypto news media outlets that takes two things and puts them together and says that there's a connection between the things. And what the two things are is, this political turmoil and a resulting bank run that's happening currently in Hong Kong, seeing lines of people at banks and ATMs, bank branches closing to prevent people from withdrawing all of their cash. And at the same time, on local Bitcoins, an over-the-counter Bitcoin exchange that serves the Hong Kong market, we saw a huge spike, their highest ever trading volume in Hong Kong specifically. So somewhere on the internet, somebody put these two things together and said, okay, hey, political turmoil often causes people to start using Bitcoin as an alternative to their, country's fiat currency. And big trading volume spike. So therefore, this must be related. People must be buying Bitcoin because there's this bank run happening currently in Hong Kong. However, there isn't much evidence that outside of local Bitcoins that anyone is really buying Bitcoins. And in fact, Noah Alborg, who is a cryptocurrency market analyst, found somebody who's basically saying, and local Bitcoins themselves said this is all sort of coming from one trader who's making massive trades. Other exchanges who also serve the Hong Kong market, including Gate.io and Paxful, another over-the-counter exchange, both told finance magnates that their Hong Kong trading volume hasn't really seen any movement. I mean, it's sort of normal. So although there is this bank run happening and there was a spike on local Bitcoins, it's unlikely that these two things are connected, even though the popular narrative at the moment is that they are.
Is there any credence at all in this kind of an assumption, or kind of that the political situation is driving people into Bitcoin?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I lost you for a second. You're back now. I mean, of course, there are situations, across the world. We see them currently, every day in places like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, places where there's economic crisis and political upheaval happening, that people do in fact turn to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a way to protect the value of their savings when their country's currencies are, rapidly devaluing and there's another kind of economic crisis happening. However, the fact is that at the moment, if anything, people are taking their Hong Kong dollars and exchanging them into US dollars rather than Bitcoin in order to protect the value of their savings because they have access to those markets. Right. So it's certainly possible. The other thing is that often on over-the-counter exchanges, we don't really have access to a ton of data on most exchanges. So it's possible that, a bunch of traders could be using exchanges that there is no public data available for. And therefore, we just don't really know. Maybe local Bitcoins is the only one that we see this on. But again, A does not necessarily equal B.
Right. I got to say, it reminds me a lot about about a year ago, I guess there were stories about how the yellow vest jacket protests in France, people also urging buy Bitcoin and stop using the euro, and we didn't see anything too major come out of that. So a lot of conjecture here, but in any case, interesting to follow along. And your last story today, another big one from this week. We're hearing that PayPal wants out of Libra. So So one of the association members, a prominent brand name, they're not interested anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they did come forward in a statement and say that they're open to possibly working with Libra in the future. So it's not necessarily, a total, the bridge isn't totally burned necessarily. However, when they pulled out of this project, the statements from Libra were a little bit spicy, let's say. Right. They were, saying it takes a certain kind of fortitude, in order to move forward with this project. Kind of complicitly or implicitly saying that PayPal does not have the kind of fortitude that it takes to work with something like Libra. But of course, PayPal is the first project to officially pull out of this. No company has, officially signed the contract saying that they're
thing. It's all in this kind of gray limbo area, right? So they signed a memorandum of understanding or kind of a letter of intent, yes, all those months ago when Libra was first announced. But nobody's officially come on and nobody's officially left. So we're waiting basically for a meeting later this month, I believe in Switzerland on the 14th or the 16th. In which hopefully we'll have more knowledge about who's in and who's out, right?
Yeah, a little bit more clarity after that point, hopefully. And of course, Bloomberg came out with a report at the beginning, at the end of last week saying that, PayPal isn't the only one that was considering leaving at the time. They hadn't yet officially left, but also Visa, MasterCard, and Stripe Incorporated were considering leaving, according to, quote, people familiar with the matter. So, we'll see. I guess at this point, these companies risk, damaging relationships with regulators based on the way that Libra moves forward and manages to handle those relationships with regulators, and also, could become at risk for some other things. Being associated with something like this could make a company sort of a target for example, class action lawsuits, if some question as to whether or not Libra will be a security. I mean, hopefully Facebook and Libra have the good sense to work with the appropriate regulators to work that out beforehand, as to not put these companies in a position where they could be targeted for those kinds of lawsuits. But these are all things, I mean, there's so many unknowns here, like there's so many new things that are, totally unprecedented things that are going to come out of this project in terms of regulation. So we really will have to wait and see, quote, who has the quote fortitude to handle it. And who just isn't willing to take the risk.
Well, and we're going to get a glimpse at the man himself, Mark Zuckerberg, taking the heat from U.S. regulators. I think that's also later on in October, supposed to testify in front of the House of Representatives. So we'll see where the wind is blowing, so to speak. Absolutely great stuff. Libra keeps producing the headlines, and thank you, Rachel, for being for offering them up for us and breaking them down with us again. Have a great week. For those of you at home, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more blockchain and cryptocurrency news.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.